thank you so much. And I'm so pleased to be here today. Thank you for asking me. You're doing really, really important work, and I'm incredibly grateful for the time that everyone is giving up to tackle and deliberate over what is, to be frank, one of the most critical issues of our time, of our generation. As Michael said at the start there, I'm a farmer, but I'm also chief exec of an organisation that was itself set up back in 2017 to try and work with these really complex and interconnected issues. We produced our reports back in 2019, and we were very grateful to get some really positive feedback from farmers groups, from green organisations, from civic society. And in fact, now we're funded as an independent charity to help put those recommendations into practice. So I'm thinking about the sorts of stuff that you're thinking about all of the time, and really grateful that you're joining in the conversation. So I'm going to be talking today. Oh, I'm not moving forward. Hold on a second. Let's see. Just trying to move my slides for, there you go. Great, good. So today I'm going to be talking to you a bit about Feeding Britain and the farming system that does that. And before I go into the tougher stuff, let's just be clear at the very start. Farming today is more productive and feeds more people than it ever has before. And despite the cost of living crisis that I suspect we're all feeling very hard at the moment, cheap food is a smaller proportion of the average household budget than it has ever been. And that's as a result of government policies, about the ingenuity of research and innovation, the ingenuity of farmers to putting food on our plates, and of course government policy that has shaped farming practice over the last 60 years in post-war Britain. But what we're all here to talk about today is that recognition that the way we have farmed in the last 60 years has come at a cost. It's come at a cost to wildlife, 48% decline in farmyard birds across key species. A half of all Britain's hedgerows have been lost since the Second World War, with farmers taking out hedgerows, being encouraged to create bigger and bigger and bigger fields, because on the face of it, that is more efficient to farm. And you'll know from your deliberations thus far how important hedgerows are to habitat for nature and for biodiversity. And importantly, 80% of the UK's peatlands have been damaged by the way that they're managed. Peatlands are a really, really important ecosystem. They hold a lot of carbon and, of course, provide for a lot of variety in nature. And as Pete was alluding to earlier, some of the ways that we have farmed up until now have contributed to real and serious impacts on both water and soil. So only 14% of English rivers meet good ecological status, and the pollution comes not just from agriculture, but from sewage, from roads, from plastics. But agriculture is an important contributor to that, and it needs to take responsibility for that. 10% of freshwater and wetland species are now threatened with extinction, and 90% of wetlands have been lost in the last 100 years. Now, that's a really important fact, because wetlands, as well as being an important ecosystem in their own right, it is often wetlands that prevent flooding further down the stream. They're a natural flood management system, and losing those wetlands means we've increased the risk of flooding for lots of towns and villages in the UK. And just a final stat for you, the drop in the earthworm population in the last 20 years has been really substantial, and earthworms are a key indicator of soil health. And as Pete said earlier, a lot of the stuff that we are reflecting on now is new science. How new might be open to debate, but a lot of the things that we are now discovering, we perhaps didn't pay enough attention to 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So the changes in science, emerging science, new science is really important. And I'll come back to that right at the end. What we invest in, the research and science that we invest in really matters, because science can only answer the questions that we're asking of it. I'm just going to say a quick thing about this image as well. That's a beautiful image, isn't it, that I picked out for you. But actually, having livestock grazing right down to the water's edge is not a good thing. And creating riparian corridors, riverside corridors, to keep livestock away from the water's edge where they might be breaking up the ground and letting soil flow in is a better practice. I'll just say that quickly. But it's not just about nature and climate. The cost of cheap food to the public health is also enormous. You're going to hear a lot more about this from Henry Dimbleby tomorrow, I think. But the reality is that cheap food and diet-related illness is causing 1 in 7 deaths in the UK. It's causing an enormous cost to the NHS, which is directly attributed to diet-related illnesses, obesity, type 2 diabetes. And at the same time, 3 million people in England, in spite of the cheap food policy that we've got, are currently suffering from undernutrition, poor nutrition. So the reality of the cheap food policy in the UK isn't just felt in the basket. In spite of the image that farmers have, they're all driving around in Range Rovers, 60% of UK farmers actually earn less than £10,000 a year. And it's not just that they're cash poor but asset rich. 30% of UK farmers are tenant farmers. They don't even own their land. Food bank use is 100 times greater today than it was a decade ago. Practically every talk I've given over the last 5 years has had to say food bank use is spiraling. And 42% of people on universal credit or benefits are having now to skip meals in order to survive. So we have the cheapest basket of food in the UK in all of Europe, and yet people are still struggling to eat healthy food. We also pay the cost of that cheap food in other ways. So for every pound spent on the food in our basket, Sustainable Food Trust has estimated that we're spending as taxpayers another £1 on cleaning up the environment and health impacts of that. And as Pete alluded to earlier, this is not just about a UK situation. We have a global food system. We produce 50% of the food that we eat in the UK. That means we import 50% of our food. And so what we eat on our plates is responsible for impacts all around the world that are felt in those countries, but also, are felt globally. Greenhouse gas emissions don't just affect the place that it's happening. It has a global impact. There are no national borders for those big issues. So it's the food on our own plates caused, for example, deforestation is caused by beef farming in South America, where forests with really sensitive, vital rainforests are being cleared for pasture or being cleared for soy production. So 80% of soy production is being used to feed animals, to feed chicken and pigs. And palm oil is in everything. It's in everything from food to deodorants to makeup. It's driving mass deforestation, loss of habitats, and releasing GHGs. So the global food system is worth £8 trillion, depending on how you count it, but broadly £8 trillion is a good enough figure to be working with. So if farmers are generally not earning shed loads of money, if primary producers are not earning shed loads of money, and if citizens, even with cheap food as it is, are struggling to buy the healthy food that we all need to survive, where's all the money? Where's all the money? And so this is a question I would like you to keep asking over the next few days. The reality is that in the global food system, fewer companies control a greater proportion of all food production, food manufacture, and food retail, the shops that we buy from land ownership to feed to plate. Now, I've put 3 words on the screen here. They're big words. I'm not even sure if I can say them properly. Commodification, consolidation, and financialization. Big words, but actually they're quite important for us to understand in the context of the global food system. And I'm going to tell you a quick anecdote. There's a chicken shed on the screen there. Where I live in Wales, the River Wye is my local river. It's a beautiful river. It's an iconic river. Poets have been writing about it for hundreds of years. At the moment, it's too dangerous to swim in the River Wye, and the River Wye is dying. So today there are demonstrations up in Hereford and down in Welsh Government in Cardiff, explaining that the reason that the River Wye is now almost completely depleted and damaged is because of the growth of the number of poultry units, of chicken sheds upstream in Powys and in Herefordshire. And the reason that there are loads and loads of chicken sheds all gathered together in a small place is because for the business that runs that practice, Cargill, it's a very efficient and a very effective method of production. So chicken is one of the main products, one of the main commodities that gets traded around the world. Having cheap chicken is a really important selling point. To keep chicken cheap, that business, Cargill, chooses to bring all its production facilities together in one place. So it's cheap for Cargill to make a great deal of money out of the production of cheap chicken. Cargill's profits are now, in this last year, in 2022, when the rest of us have been struggling to think about how we afford the food on our plates, Cargill's profits are up by 23%. It's a privately owned company, and the profits are up by 23% to be distributed between 10 family members who are sharing £14 billion each. That profit has come from the destruction of the ecosystem where I live, where my community lives, where my friends and family live, right up the Wye. So we are paying the cost in Britain, in the Wye Valley, in Hereford, in Powys, for the profits that Cargill can make. So that's a kind of illustration of those big terms: commodification, consolidation, financialization. Companies that are just focused on how to make more and more money out of food, which is, I think, as Pete said right at the start, probably the one thing that none of us can live without. We can probably live without a lot of other things in reality, but the one thing that none of us are going to live without for more than 3, 4, 5 days is food. And here's an illustration of the brands who are also controlling the food on our plates. So 10 brands, 10 global brands control pretty much all of the food and drinks that you see in the shops. Now, I'm just going to say quickly, you'll hear, and you may well believe, these companies are only making what people want to buy. So it's citizens' fault, it's consumers' fault that we're in this situation, because, bless their little hearts, they're only making what we want to buy. But just to be really clear here, companies are making products that are bad for the planet and bad for our health because they can profit out of it, because they can make more money out of it. Lots of those products that you'll see on the screen there are categorically unhealthy, categorically bad for us, and yet they're still on our shelves. And for every £5 that government spends on healthy eating campaigns, telling us what we should be eating more of, those companies are spending £200 on marketing campaigns to persuade us to eat more of it. So to make it all about us and our buying choices is really missing the point. We should not have to be choosing from these really unhealthy products. We shouldn't be making them at all, frankly. And I can't keep going without saying something about the political instability that we're experiencing. Ukraine is very, very much in our minds and our thoughts, but there's conflict all around the world, and very often in places which are important in commodity production, in food production. Right now, food shortages are incredibly severe in North and Sub-Saharan Africa, who have been big importers of Russian and Ukraine grain. Food price inflation is sky high, and food security, recognizing that we have, as a planet, become over-reliant on what are in fact quite fragile globalized systems, it's just accelerating the questions that we're dealing with today. And there's a kind of increasing recognition that globalized food systems just aren't working effectively for nature, for climate, or frankly, for most people. So let's get on to the UK policy context. What can we do about—
Sorry, Sue, can I just say your time is really up at the moment? So I wonder, is there a couple of last slides you just want to wrap up with?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm gonna whiz through it. Hopefully you've got these slides. So these slides are quite explanatory. So there's changes in the UK from Europe through to being in the European Union to post-Brexit policy. That's all still under discussion, and I think Martin will probably say quite a bit more on that. There is a role for private finance, but this in itself is complicated. At the moment, we're paying a lot of lip service to how private money can maybe come in and do some of this work, but it's really risky, and we need to talk a lot more about that. There are alternatives. There are alternatives for a fairer and more sustainable food system. Lots of farmers are already doing this work. And our modelling is showing that you can meet multiple needs at the same time. You can reduce emissions, you can support nature, you can keep food production at the core of farming. And so there are models now available, work being done. You can look on that website that does answer more than one question at one time. This is how we can get there, moving away from what we're eating, prioritize farmland in particular ways, moving to what we call modern mixed farming, which does support nature-friendly farming, climate-friendly farming, and produces more of the healthy food that we need. We can use good technologies. There are plenty of good technologies available for us to explore. Not all of them are consistent with this vision that I'm describing to you. And this is the important slide. What's needed to make this happen? We need to invest in farmers through the new government support schemes, which are called ELMS in England, and are different in Wales and in Scotland. Invest in farmers to farm for nature and climate. We need to break the dependency on the artificial agrochemicals, which are polluting nature. We need to direct UK research investment towards responsible research, regulate private finance to make sure that it is aligned for public value and not just working for the money as it does at the moment. Have to pay attention to supply chains so that farmers receive fair returns and citizens aren't paying twice, and companies are not profiting from selling us stuff that's bad for us and bad for the planet. We need to set consistent standards for international trade, not engaging in a race to the bottom, being responsible for our global footprint. We have to think through how we use our land, and that needs to be an open and transparent and inclusive process. And of course, we do need to deal with the diet issue, but everybody should have enough healthy food easily available to them. One of the great benefits of Brexit, and some might say there aren't that many, oops, wash my mouth out, but one benefit of leaving the European Union has been that the UK has been able to develop a new scheme to support and invest in the kinds of farming that does more of what colleagues earlier have talked about, enabling farmers to produce food and protect nature and sequester carbon, act on the climate crisis. Now, the new scheme, it's called ELMS in England, it's called Sustainable Land Management in Wales, has different principles. So this scheme is intended to pay public money to get things that are beneficial, directly beneficial for the public, what we call public goods, things that the markets don't price in, but are nonetheless really, really important. healthy soils, hedgerow creation, managing nutrients, which is the kind of fertilizer stuff that Martin was talking about earlier, changing the way we control pests. Again, Martin referenced this, moving away from chemical control through to using nature and natural systems to control pests, and planting trees within the context of a farm business, putting trees in, so planting fruit trees, nut trees, silver pasture trees, willow that animals actually like to eat, incorporating much more tree cover into the farmland landscape. So at the moment, that still costs £3 billion. That's the investment that the government is making in changing farming practices in the UK. But the issue at the moment is it's still very much in design. It's been in design for the last 4-5 years. And to be candid, at the moment, the take-up's been slow. Farmers are confused, I think that's fair to say, and not clear about what government policy is. And it has contributed to there being a sense of huge uncertainty across the farming sector. So farmers are constantly asking the question, what kind of farming system do we need to be investing in? Very often it takes years to change a farming system to one that works more effectively for a viable farm business. And farmers are really asking that question, what kind of farming does this government want us to invest in for health, well-being, for affordable and nourishing food for people, for climate and for nature?